I hope this is an exciting one for you today because it's going to be probably a little different to some of the other things you've seen, and I hope it can sort of be a pattern interrupt here today. So the title of my presentation is Open but Private Data Legos and Blind Computation. It might sound like an oxymoron, right, to say open but private in the same sentence, but really the gist of this presentation today is that a lot of data you cannot actually operate on and share if it is not private and if it's not encrypted, because otherwise it can only exist in silos. So by unlocking those silos through blind computation, we're allowed to suddenly take these private data lakes that we have, that we generate every day as people wandering this earth and the internet, and we can plug it into places we couldn't before, and that unlocks a lot of value for us. So I'll start with this quote by Eric Hughes from Cypherpunk's manifesto, and it's, "Privacy is necessary for an open society in the electronic age. Privacy is not secrecy. Privacy is the power to selectively reveal oneself to the world." And you may have heard this quote in the context of more, activist discussions and speeches, but I'm actually taking a different angle here today, which is a commercial one. I want to make the case for why viewing data and data ownership as private property rather than necessarily just as a human right, and it unlocks new revenue flows for us as people and makes us data sovereign, so that all of our data isn't just something that ends up belonging to a faceless corporation, but rather to us, the generators of that data. So here's a little graphic I made. I am neither an engineer nor a designer, so I hope you enjoy this. But this is the data flow of how things exist today, right, without Nillion. There's the data you produce, and then that data goes straight into a big company, a big data company that owns your data. It sells it to another data buyer, makes money from it, and that cycle repeats. And it's irrelevant whether you are acutely aware of this, whether you think about it a lot or not at all. It's happening, right? I know a ton of people who work in industry who used to work in the data brokerage industry, who used to work in MarTech. It's something that happens today, and this is a huge market. The data market is a lot bigger than the crypto market in its totalities that exist today. So it's a massive untapped opportunity for us to look into. And then with Nillion, this changes the paradigm quite a bit, because all of a sudden we go from you and your data belonging to somebody else to you and your data belonging to you, and you having the power, once again, going back to Eric Hughes, to selectively reveal yourself to the world when and if it conveniences you. So by being able to do that, you have the opportunity to now sell or lease your data, and not in a one-time fashion. I'll explain how that works a bit more. But you're able to lease this data out to anybody who might benefit from having it, right? With blind computation, that means that you're not just selling a file with your raw data and saying, keep it, use it forever, however you want. You're saying every time that you run an algorithm, every time you use AI to learn something about a target audience that you want to learn about, you're going to pay me for that use, because you're never going to keep the inputs, you're never going to keep the raw data. What you're going to get is an output based on the data that I have shared in a completely cryptographically secure way with you to train your models on. So many of you here at this conference have probably heard of crypto Legos or DeFi Legos, this concept of composability and interoperability across different tokenized assets. So a very clear example is liquid staking. You can take a token, you can stake it, you get a wrapper that's representative of the underlying. And now with that wrapper, while it's earning yield for you somewhere, you can take it somewhere else to a money market or a DEX. You can provide liquidity, and all of a sudden, one thing becomes many things. And depending on your risk appetite, you can keep looping that over and over and over again. But with data, it's very different, right? We generate data, and either it sits statically somewhere, like in a central database where all kinds of regulations, data protections mean that it can never leave and it can never be used by anybody other than the person you granted that access to, or that data is leaked out into the world and you're basically dealing with MEV but at a personal data level. So what that means is that every time that you produce any data of value, you're the last person to ever benefit from it. I'm going to give some clear examples here. So when we move to data Legos, which is this new sort of phase or this evolution, privacy 2.0, which we're thinking about, and I want to really differentiate something here, because when people think about crypto privacy, they usually think about Monero ring signatures, Zcash, all kinds of shielded protocols. But what we're thinking about is a way to use off-chain data, things that you would think about in Web 2, and then tie that back to crypto economic incentives so that we can have people all of a sudden generating the kind of valuable data that they might not otherwise, right? Because now they have a financial incentive to do so. So here, for example, we have genomic sequencing data. This is a company called Monatic DNA. And just an hour ago, over at the terminal bar at Denver Union Station, they did the first ever fully secure, cryptographically private genomic sequencing in history, right? There was about 20 people that showed up, spat into a tube. That tube will be sent to a lab. That lab will then return fully encrypted results. And with those fully encrypted results, Monatic DNA will leverage Nillion's blind computation to find other data points or other things that might be interesting about these people who have participated in this. And now that you have this, historically, either it sat in 23andMe's database and then they sold it without your consent, or maybe you gave your consent, you just never read 30 pages of terms and conditions, or it just sat there and never really generated you any further insights other than the ones you got when you first claimed the report. Well, all of a sudden with Monatic DNA, you have the encryption and decryption keys to your genomic data, right, to your genetic data, which means that you are the only person on Earth who can dictate how and where that's used. So any other app that's built on Nillion and is part of the Monatic DNA store, all of a sudden with one click, you can port over your data and get results, or again, lease out that data. And in the same way that people think of not your keys, not your crypto, they should start thinking about not your keys, not your data, because data is valuable. We've been psyoped very successfully into believing it's not, but it fetches a price on the open market today, and that's the important thing to remember. So in this case, just as an example, you could have Monatic DNA, and then you could port it into another Nillion-powered app, like either HealthBox here or Stadium Science, the one on the left being incentivized health data activity pools, and the one on the right being prediction markets on long-tail health events like sleep, recovery, and I'll give a few more examples of what they do there. But just a few examples of the price this fetches, because I think a lot of people say, well, my data is not worth anything. Actually, your data is worth a lot. Even data that's not as sensitive as health data or genomic data, even your car's data, right, automotive vehicle data, can fetch a price of $1,000 a year. We have some deep in projects building on Nillion who are allowing you to tap into that by just plugging in a device into your car and sending that information back to car manufacturers. But the point is that when you start to add up all these data points, and it's not just things like email and click attribution, which are pennies on the dollar, but more sensitive types of data, this data starts to be much more valuable because there are real people and companies behind it who would benefit from acquiring it. Medical research companies, pharmaceutical companies, supplement companies, you name it. And so, we've had two problems. One is that, A, they're selling your data and you're not getting a penny for it. You're paying them, actually. And two, because this data is not cryptographically secure and encrypted when it's computed on, there are inevitably data breaches, right? And it's only a matter of time until it happens. If it's not encrypted, it's not your data. So this is Monatic DNA, which I was talking about, and they utilize Nillion's PetNet, so we offer privacy enhancing technologies in combination. That includes things like multi-party computation, fully homomorphic encryption, trusted execution environments. But the point is that privacy is a spectrum, and each application needs to understand and make the decision based on the level of sensitivity of the data they're processing, how they want to use those technologies in combination, and where there are opportunities to make some sacrifices for usability and when there are not. But at the end of the day, all these applications have one thing in common, which is that they are building for real people and not just this niche of chronically online DeFi users. These are people who might never have set up a wallet, right? But can all of a sudden benefit from the concept of having the encryption and decryption keys to their own data. Even if they don't see it as such, it may just be presented as a button that says, share your data, don't share your data. And so one of the things about crypto that's really fantastic is that we've created very, very smoothly running crypto economic incentives. In other words, we figured out how to make people make certain things happen or encourage people to act in a particular sort of way. The problem is that we usually just apply that to kind of dead-end games of musical chairs where nobody benefits and it's PvP. But what if we could apply those crypto economic incentives to getting people to generate data sets that are valuable for us to advance discoveries and research in the real world that they might not have done otherwise? So, genomic sequencing is an example. Maybe you really just don't care about what your heritage is, or whether you have a predisposition to being intolerant to gluten, or whether you are more of a morning person or a night person. But hey, what if I tell you that getting genomically sequenced through Monatic DNA means that you can now in perpetuity put your data into an encrypted database secured by Nillion, and anytime any sort of company wants to tap into your data set, you will get paid out in the same way that a Twitch streamer might get paid out. All of a sudden, we're creating incentives using crypto economic incentives for people to behave in particular ways that advance real world progress. So that's one of the things that I think is most exciting about the combination of Nillion and applications that, whether outwardly or whether they abstract it away, are leveraging crypto rails in their architecture. So I want to give an example here of Stadium Science. I mentioned it was a prediction market. This is run by the same guy who started DeSci NYC. He's here at this conference, but it's really interesting because, you know, I like to think of DeSci as kind of like a reverse mullet. So it's like party in the front, business in the back. And what that means is that you are doing really silly things with really, you know, fun, friendly user interfaces that really just kind of feel like gambling, like slots. But unlike a lot of what you see in DeFi today, they're creating, again, these incentives for people to produce and generate this sort of data that there's real buyers from on the other side of that equation, right? So, for example, it could be here a competition where there's a prediction market and understanding what kinds of treatments for long COVID are most effective, and that includes things like taking wearable data, like a Whoop, Apple Watch, whatever, encrypting it, and then sending that to Stadium Science, which processes it with NillionDB, and all of a sudden, you sharing that data means that you can tap into these new revenue sources of any time a company wants to know something about long COVID, you're getting paid for it, right? And these are, like, again, data points you're generating every single day, whether you know it or not. It doesn't even have to be a wearable. There's a million other ways to do it, but it's there today, so why not monetize it? And yeah, another example is, like, does vitamin C improve heart rates, improve heart rate sleep? So HRV is what they're measuring here. And heart rate variability, that's something that's produced by all of these different wearables. And it's, you know, really fantastic because you can start all these kind of gamified competitions where you're taking this private data, you're piping it in, you're allowing speculators to bet on the market of any sort of event. It could be like, how long until Brian Johnson gets the flu? It could be, you know, how beneficial is it for me to eat 2 eggs in the morning versus 3 if I'm a male, age 32, that lives on the East Coast of Hispanic descent, right? So all these things start to become really interesting when, for example, you can pipe in Monatic DNA's data from genomic sequencing to understand how specific behaviors on certain subsets of the population make an impact. And as you can see, I've chosen to focus mostly on DeSci and health data today because I think it's one of the most interesting verticals building within Nillion. But the opportunities this opens up for really any vertical that would benefit from generating more data is, you know, unlimited. So with that, I won't go on too much longer, but the bottom line is, you know, let's get people starting to think about not your keys, not your data, in the same way that we say not your keys, not your crypto, because if you don't own your data, that means someone else does. If you're not monetizing it, someone else is. So, you know, all the activism, all the privacy is important. It's human rights thing aside. Let's just think about this as a commercial opportunity where we bring power back to people. We empower them to become self-sovereign with their data, decide who and how they selectively disclose themselves to, and make money from it. So thanks, everyone, for coming to my talk. That's Nillion, the blind computer.